I absolutely believe that the results of this election were fraudulent, but I'm under an obligation to back that up, okay? You got to produce some data to have an opinion, or else you're just talking a bunch of...
Hey everybody, thanks for stopping in. In this video, I just want to document the conversation that Ben Shapiro had with Dan Bongino yesterday about the 2020 election, and let's get back into it.
Let's talk about kind of the difference between Trump 2020 and Trump 2024. So when you look at Trump 2020, I know that you have strong opinions about what happened in the election. My take on that has been they changed the rules, which is a form of cheating. They radically increased the amount of mail-in balloting, which is a form of cheating. There was a voter increase of 22 million in terms of just pure number of votes between 2016 and 2020, which is unprecedented in American history. It obviously benefited Joe Biden. They hid the Hunter Biden laptop story for a full month. The entire media were arrayed against him. The institutions of his own government were arrayed against. All of that is a form of cheating. With that said, I don't think the electoral fraud proof is strong enough to suggest that he lost purely on the basis of electoral fraud. So there's that. Assuming my premise, which is that he actually lost in 2020 on just the pure number of counted votes. What do you think changes between 2020 and 2024? Because clearly something has. He was lagging in the polls behind Biden the entirety of the 2020 election cycle by somewhere between 5 and 7 points. And then, of course, he ends up losing by much closer. This time around, he's been leading almost wire to wire.
Right.
And so what that says to me, is that really about Trump and changes with regard to Trump? Or is that people taking a second look at Trump because Biden is such unbelievable at being president of the United States?
Yeah. Well, and you well know, the polls always underestimate.
Yeah, exactly.
So if he's ahead, and I saw today he's tied in Virginia.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We haven't won Virginia since 2004.
Real Clear Politics just moved it into the toss-up category. It's insane.
I mean, and I hate polls. I've said it all the time. They're points in time, and they're typically off, but they always underestimate it straight. But let's get to the election. I want to say first, I can't prove a counterfactual. Obviously, I love economics, but I can't tell you what would have happened because it didn't. However, I absolutely believe that the results of this election were fraudulent, but I'm under an obligation to back that up, okay? You got to produce some data to have an opinion, or else you're just talking a bunch of... If you go back to 2012, and I encourage all your listeners to do this, it's a New York Times article, not the New York Post, it's the New York Times. It's a piece by Adam Liptak. It's called Error and Fraud Rises as Absentee Ballot Rises. It's a New York Times piece written in 2012, over 10 years ago. It was meant to eviscerate absentee balloting, because back then, if you remember, it was a big deal in Florida with military and elderly.
Yep.
So the New York Times...
People who legitimately should be able to vote.
Right,
yes.
Who vote Republican. And they didn't like it. So they wrote this hit piece, and it was a pretty good analysis. And you'll see they talk about all the stats, and they quote a bunch of figures saying, you're almost guaranteed to double your rejection and fraud rates by mail. It's not complicated logic.
Keeping that in mind, let's look at this article from 538. Absentee ballot rejection rates decreased in 2020. Decreased. The number of rejected absentee ballots as a share of absentee ballots returned in the 2020 and 2016 general elections in the 27 states and Washington, D.C. that provide rejected ballot data. And I'm not going to read them off, but I'll scroll past so that you guys can actually just have a look at the difference. Okay, so for many states, the number of rejected absentee ballots turned out to be an incredible success story. Massachusetts, for example, cut its rejection rate from a mediocre 3.3% in 2016 to an excellent 0.6% in 2020. For reference, states historically have had rejected rates of up to 6%. Maryland rejected about the same number of absentee ballots in 2020 as it did in 2016, despite 9 times as many total absentee ballots being cast. 1.5 million versus 177,000. 4 other states also rejected fewer ballots in absentee terms in 2020 than they did in 2016, despite a sizable increase in the total number of absentee ballots cast, which is completely contradictory to the common sense application that Dan Bongino just stated. But let's continue.
There's a choke point if I vote in person. You're the election official. I have to go give an ID if it's a voter ID state. I show up 5 minutes later and try to vote again. They're going to be like, Ben, Dan, you were just here. In a ballot box, there is no such choke point. So there's an obvious fraud mechanism. This isn't hard to figure out. So the fact that the New York Times did this expose says to me, they already know there's going to be massive problems with then mail-in balloting. Then you do it for the first time. You send out ballots across the country, and I mean, this is laughable. You tell us, oh my God, the most secure election in
that's
American history.
ridiculous.
Like, it's a joke. I can't prove the counterfactual. Nobody can. It's a shame. I don't believe in my heart that result was legitimate. Combine that with some other things. So it's not just that I believe the mail-in balloting was a complete train wreck, and I believe probably, especially Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania changes the rules at the last minute, and they just make it up. You got to put a date on the ballot. The court's like, no, you don't. We changed our mind. Like, no, you do. It actually says that, like in the law, it literally, not figuratively.
Right. No, you have to stop counting the ballot days beyond the election.
It's insane. And then there's this myth out there that, well, this has all been litigated. No, it has not. Nothing made it past the initial standing phase. It was not litigated. That is total garbage. It was not litigated at all. And then I'll make one last point. The Hunter Biden fiasco. It's obviously, that's a separate matter. I get it.
And I'll cut in right there and take you back to 2022 just to let Elise Stefanik remind you of what happened.
Of the people that were made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story, 53% would have changed their vote, including 61% of Democrats. This is the definition of election meddling, and it's the definition of election meddling by the FBI on behalf of Democrats, paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. It's collusion, it's corruption, and it's unconstitutional.
But there was obviously a cabal, deep state, silly state, the blob, I don't care what you call them, of people who were very well connected, who hid from the public vital voting information. You combine those three factors, there's no sane person that can say with a straight face, with the barrel of a gun at their face going, hey man, this thing was totally legit on the up and up. I don't buy it at all. I think it was a total scam. I'm just hoping now some states have made some pretty substantial changes, Georgia, Florida, Arizona somewhat, that in the swing states we got to hold this. Because it's going to be a train wreck in California.
I mean, the biggest question for me for Trump, just in terms of the mechanisms, are really the state parties. How are the state parties going to perform? Because when it comes to the turnout efforts in Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, like there are certain states that Trump is expanding the map in, like Nevada. Right now, he's leading well outside the margin of error, which is just
and he has been. For
the entire time. It's totally crazy. But if you look at Michigan is razor thin. Yeah. Pennsylvania is super razor thin.
And this is where I got to give a shout out to Scott Pressler. He's called The Persistence over on X. I highly recommend you give him a follow. Not only does he deserve it, but he's actually very entertaining, and he keeps everybody updated on the fact that he is flipping Bucks County, Pennsylvania from blue to red nearly single-handedly by registering voters. He's been spending time in prisons, registering felons, and overall, I just can't be more proud of what this guy is doing for our country. And if Trump ends up winning Pennsylvania, Scott Pressler might single-handedly be the one that saves our country.
And there it's going to come down to a question of turnout. So there the question is going to be really, how does the Pennsylvania Republican Party perform? Or the Michigan Republican Party, which has been pretty dicey in the last few election cycles in terms of its efficacy. Yeah. How are they going to perform, or Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think we can both agree. Listen, we don't like mail-in balloting. Republicans just don't, and I just told you why. It's prone to fraud. But I'm a realpolitik guy.
Yeah, go do it right now. Go mail.
Brother, we're stuck with what we have.
You know where we did it? We did it in Florida.
Yeah, and we won by 20.
And we killed everybody.
And Trump won twice. So the point is, mail-in balloting can be done relatively securely. Let's just put this out. I'd rather not have it. Unless you're in the military or you're in a nursing home or a medical emergency, it should not be a thing. But it is.
Right.
We're stuck with it. We can change it if we win. Maybe we get H.R. 2 passed. But we're stuck with it now. So I like the pivot. Thankfully, he's made this pivot where now he's like, listen, let's just swamp this thing. Because if we're stuck with these damn rules, I mean, think about it, like early voting. When I ran for office, I can't even tell you how many Republicans they'd say, I don't like voting early on principle alone.
And listen to what Dan has to say right here, because this is important on how we get Trump. And, well, frankly, we need a Republican down ticket election. That way, Trump is not handcuffed by Congress or the House like he was in the second half of his first term, even though it's traditionally not the way Republicans or people who vote Republican actually vote.
I say, you realize there's no way to win an election that way, right? The Democrats bank their early vote. You know what happens on Election Day? It rains, people's kids are late for school, someone gets a fever. That's about 1-2% of the vote that doesn't show up because of some environmental anomaly. The Democrats don't have that problem. We're stuck with this stuff. Can we change it? We can. Do I want to change it? Yes. But I live in the real world, not the world I want. And I'm glad they pivoted on that. They got to swamp this thing and bank. If that early voting starts tomorrow, vote tomorrow.
I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. Hopefully you guys got something out of this interview. If you did, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch the interview in its entirety, it is available on the Daily Wire website. I will post a link in the description. But just to reiterate, this election, let's go ahead and get out there and vote early. Let's not wait till election day for all those reasons that Dan just mentioned. That 1 to 2% margin might be all that it takes to swing this for the good guys in this battle of good versus evil, so that Trump is not handcuffed this time and he can actually make America great again like it needs to be. See you guys in the next one.